The night of Catherine Whitmore's 21st birthday was meant to be a grand celebration. Greyston Abbey, towering above the cliffs of Northumberland, glowed with candlelight and the sound of music echoed through its ancient stone halls. Guests in elegant attire filled the ballroom, raising their glasses to the young woman who was destined to inherit the vast Whitmore estate. Catherine, radiant in a gown of pale blue silk, had greeted her family and neighbors with the grace expected of her. Yet, those who looked closer could see a flicker of unease in her eyes. She laughed when spoken to, she smiled when congratulated, but her gaze often drifted toward the shadowed corners of the hall, as though she expected someone, or something, to emerge from the darkness. As the evening deepened, the storm outside grew louder. Rain lashed against the tall windows, and the sea roared far below the cliffs. Just before midnight, Catherine slipped away from the crowd. She was last seen walking through the great oak doors that led into the abbey's cloisters, her figure vanishing into the dim torchlight. When the clock struck 12, a hush fell over the ballroom. The young heiress did not return. At first, the guests assumed she had gone to compose herself, but minutes turned into an hour, and whispers spread through the gathering. By dawn, panic seized the Whitmore family. Catherine was nowhere to be found. The search began immediately. Servants scoured the abbey, lanterns in hand, calling her name. The grounds were combed, the cliffs examined. Yet no trace of her was discovered, save for a silk ribbon from her gown caught on the ivy near a hidden archway. Jonathan Whitmore, her cousin, stood staring at that ribbon as the storm clouds broke into morning light. His heart told him this was no mere disappearance. Catherine had stumbled upon something she was never meant to know. And Greyston Abbey, with its endless corridors and forgotten chambers, was keeping its silence. The morning after Catherine's disappearance, the abbey was cloaked in silence. Servants tiptoed through the corridors, their faces pale, as if the stones themselves were whispering secrets. The family gathered in the great hall, their expressions tense and weary after a night without sleep. Lady Agnes Whitmore, Catherine's grandmother, sat in her carved oak chair, her trembling hands gripping a rosary. "This house has seen sorrow before," she murmured, though no one dared to ask what she meant. Jonathan stood apart, his mind restless. He could not accept the simple explanation of an abduction. There had been no ransom note, no signs of struggle, only that ribbon near the ivy. He decided to search the cloisters himself, ignoring the protests of the steward. The cloisters, with their cold arches and echoing footsteps, seemed to breathe with age. Jonathan's lantern flickered against the damp walls as he pressed deeper into the shadows. At the far end, behind a half-rotted tapestry, he found a narrow passage. Few in the family even remembered it existed. Dust lay thick on the stones, but one thing disturbed the stillness: faint footprints, small and delicate, leading into the darkness. Jonathan's breath quickened. He followed them carefully, his light brushing across carvings that had long been hidden. Symbols, worn with time, spiraled across the walls, almost like a warning. The passage ended at a heavy door of iron, locked with a mechanism unlike any he had seen. Yet tucked beneath the frame, half buried in dust, was an envelope. Jonathan bent and lifted it with cautious hands. The wax seal was unbroken, but the crest stamped into it was unmistakable, an older version of the Whitmore family emblem, one no longer in use. He stared at the letter, a cold dread running through him. Catherine must have found this. And whatever lay within was enough to make her vanish into the night. Jonathan slipped the envelope into his coat just as he heard footsteps approaching. He quickly doused his lantern, holding his breath in the dark. Someone else was in the passage. Jonathan pressed himself against the cold stone, his ears straining. The footsteps drew nearer, deliberate and unhurried, echoing through the hidden passage like the tolling of a bell. Whoever it was, they knew this place, for the steps did not falter. A dim glow appeared around the bend, another lantern carried steadily by a tall figure cloaked in black. Jonathan's pulse thundered in his throat. He dared not move. The stranger paused before the iron door, gloved hand brushing across the rusted lock as though testing its strength. Then, to Jonathan's shock, the figure knelt and placed a key into the mechanism. The heavy lock clicked, but the door did not open. Instead, the stranger withdrew the key, slipped it into a pocket, and whispered something too low for Jonathan to catch. After a long silence, the figure turned and vanished back the way they had come, lantern light dwindling into darkness. Jonathan exhaled slowly, his heart racing. Someone in Grayston Abbey held a key to a door that none of the family claimed to know existed. Whoever they were, they had not wanted to be seen. When Jonathan returned to the main hall, the family was gathered once more. Lady Agnes's eyes followed him with an intensity that unsettled him. It was almost as though she knew where he had been. At that moment, a commotion broke out near the grand staircase. A servant, pale and breathless, rushed into the hall. In his trembling hands, he carried a folded piece of paper, damp with sea spray. "It was found on the cliffs," the servant stammered. "Pinned beneath a stone." Jonathan felt his stomach tighten as the paper was unfolded. Written in Catherine's hand were only 6 words. "Do not trust those within these walls." The warning in Catherine's hand unsettled everyone. Yet while the family whispered in alarm, Jonathan kept silent, his mind turning over the strange events of the passage and the locked iron door. He longed to reveal what he had seen, but something in his instincts told him to wait. If Catherine had written those words, then her enemy was not outside, but within the abbey itself. Later that evening, Jonathan sought refuge in the library. The vast chamber smelled of dust and vellum, its shelves rising high into the shadows. As he trailed his fingers across the spines of forgotten tomes, he noticed a section of books slightly out of place, as though someone had recently moved them. Behind the row lay a recess in the paneling, and within it a bundle of letters tied with faded ribbon. Jonathan untied them carefully. The ink was brown with age, the script delicate and precise. They were addressed to Lady Agnes Whitmore, and dated nearly half a century earlier. His eyes widened as he read. They spoke of a secret liaison, of a child born in secrecy, hidden away to preserve the family's honor. Could it be true? Was there an heir to the Whitmore name long forgotten, or deliberately erased? Before he could read further, a voice startled him. "You should not be prying into what is not yours." Jonathan turned sharply. Lady Agnes stood in the doorway, her silver hair glinting in the firelight. Her eyes, sharp despite her years, were fixed upon the letters in his hand. For a long moment, silence stretched between them, broken only by the ticking of the tall clock. Finally, she spoke, her voice low and brittle. "Some truths, Jonathan, are best left buried. For if they rise again, they may consume us all." Her warning echoed through the library. But Jonathan, clutching the letters, knew he had stumbled upon the very secret that had cost Catherine her safety. And perhaps, her freedom. The night pressed heavily over Grayston Abbey, its ancient stones groaning under the wind. Jonathan could not sleep. The words of Lady Agnes gnawed at his thoughts, mingling with Catherine's warning. There was more hidden in this house than anyone dared to admit. Clutching the bundle of letters, he returned to the cloisters. The storm had eased, leaving only the soft patter of rain and the distant crash of waves. He lit his lantern and traced his way back to the narrow passage. The footprints were still there, leading to the iron door. Jonathan knelt, studying the strange lock. It was unlike any he had seen, carved with twisting shapes that seemed almost alive in the flickering light. Remembering the letters, he examined their seals once more. One of them bore a faint impression that matched the shape on the lock. He pressed the paper against it, and with a slow, grinding sound, the mechanism shifted. The door opened. A stale breath of air swept past him, carrying the scent of stone and secrecy. Lantern raised, Jonathan stepped inside. The chamber was small, circular, its walls lined with shelves of ledgers, documents, and portraits cloaked in dust. In the center stood a heavy wooden table, and on it lay a single leather-bound journal. Jonathan opened it, and his pulse quickened. It was Catherine's handwriting. Page after page of notes, sketches, and observations filled the journal. She had been investigating the Whitmore lineage, tracing names scratched out of parish records, hunting for proof of a hidden branch of the family. Her last entry chilled him to the bone. They are watching me. I am close to the truth. If anything happens, let this be known, the heir of Whitmore still lives. A floorboard creaked behind him. Jonathan turned sharply, lantern trembling in his grip. Someone had followed him into the chamber. Jonathan's lantern cast a wavering glow across the chamber as he braced himself. The shadow stretched longer against the wall before a figure stepped forward. It was not a servant, nor a member of the family. It was the cloaked stranger he had glimpsed before. The hood was drawn back, revealing a face gaunt and pale, yet with striking eyes that bore an uncanny resemblance to the Whitmore line. The man spoke softly, his voice carrying a weight of restrained fury. You should not have come here. Jonathan steadied his breath. And yet Catherine did. Where is she? The man's expression flickered, torn between silence and confession. Finally, he said, safe, for now. But she has uncovered what your family has spent decades burying. They will not let it stand. Jonathan's grip on the journal tightened. Who are you? The stranger straightened, his gaze fierce. My name is Samuel. I am the son that Lady Agnes denied. Hidden from the records, raised in shadows. The true heir of Whitmore. The words hung heavy in the chamber, as though the very stones absorbed them. Jonathan felt his mind reel. If Samuel spoke truth, then Catherine had not vanished at random, she had found him. Samuel stepped closer, his eyes fixed on the journal. She trusted me with her findings. But the others discovered too soon. They will try to silence us both. Before Jonathan could respond, the faint sound of footsteps echoed down the passage leading to the chamber. More than one pair, urgent, closing in. Samuel snatched the lantern from Jonathan's hand and doused the flame. Darkness swallowed them whole, leaving only the sound of approaching danger. Amelia stood before the heavy oak doors that led to the east wing, her heart thundering in her chest. The corridor behind her seemed darker than usual, as though the house itself urged her to turn back. Yet something drew her forward. For years, her father had forbidden her to step beyond these doors, claiming it was unsafe. Now, with the key in her trembling hand, she was about to discover why. The lock yielded with a reluctant click, and the hinges groaned as the doors swung open. Dust swirled in the air, disturbed by her presence. The east wing was cloaked in shadow, the curtains drawn tightly as though the rooms had been abandoned for decades. Furniture stood shrouded in white sheets, resembling ghostly figures frozen in time. The silence pressed against her ears, broken only by the creak of the wooden floorboards beneath her feet. She lit a small lantern and ventured further, her eyes scanning the strange objects scattered about. A large portrait hung crooked on the wall, its subject obscured by grime. When she wiped it clean with her sleeve, she froze. It was her father, younger, but with an expression she had never seen before, stern, almost fearful. His hand rested protectively on the shoulder of a boy. But it was not Edward. A chill ran through her veins. Who was the child in the portrait, and why had her father hidden this part of his life? She moved to a writing desk near the window, where drawers had been locked and sealed. With effort, she pried one open. Inside lay letters bound with a faded ribbon. Her father's handwriting was unmistakable. As she read the first letter, her pulse quickened. The words spoke of debts, of secrecy, of arrangements made in desperation. But most shocking of all, the letters revealed the existence of another heir. Someone entirely unknown to the family. A floorboard creaked behind her. Amelia spun around, clutching the lantern to her chest. The light caught a figure standing at the threshold of the east wing. The shadows swallowed their features, but the voice was unmistakable. "You should not have come here, Amelia." Her breath caught in her throat as she whispered his name. Edward. And in that instant, she knew he had been watching her all along. The storm outside had eased into a soft drizzle, leaving Ashbury House wrapped in mist. Eleanor carried her lantern through the western corridor, the one wing of the house long abandoned. Every step echoed against the bare stone, and the air smelt of damp wood and dust. She had dreamt of this place as a child, yet never dared to walk here alone until now. Her lantern light fell upon the faded wallpaper. A section hung loose, curled at the edges as though it had been disturbed. With trembling fingers, Eleanor pulled it back. Behind it, she discovered a narrow wooden panel, almost invisible unless one looked closely. Heart pounding, she pressed against it, and with a reluctant creak, the panel gave way. The narrow passage behind was suffocatingly dark. Dust swirled in the air, and cobwebs clung to her sleeves. She hesitated, but then remembered her father's whispered warning before he passed, words she had dismissed as delirium. "Do not trust the papers they show you. The truth is buried where the walls remember." The lantern revealed a cramped chamber at the end. Inside stood a small desk, untouched by time, covered in yellowing documents tied with a faded ribbon. On top lay a leather-bound journal with the name Thomas Ashbury pressed into the cover. Eleanor opened it carefully. The pages revealed her grandfather's handwriting, confessions inked in trembling strokes. He spoke of debts, of betrayal, of a son cast aside not by choice, but by deception orchestrated within the family itself. Beneath the journal was another bundle, a will, signed and sealed, entirely different from the one read aloud in the hall. This one left Ashbury House not to Edward, but to Eleanor alone. The ink was authentic, the signature clear. Her breath caught. If this was real, then everything Edward claimed was false. Someone had forged the documents to shift the fortune away from her. But who had access? Who had the power to conceal the original and replace it? A sudden sound broke her thoughts. A floorboard groaned outside the secret chamber. Eleanor froze, clutching the journal to her chest. The lantern flickered. Someone else was in the corridor. Someone who already knew this hidden place existed. The handle of the panel began to shift. The morning sun poured through the tall windows of Briarwood Hall, casting streaks of gold across the library. Eleanor sat at her father's old writing desk, her trembling fingers unfolding the letter she had discovered hidden behind the false panel. The parchment was fragile, its edges browned with age. She leaned closer, her breath shallow, as the faint ink began to fade before her eyes. "No," she whispered, clutching it tighter. The words that had seemed so clear in the candlelight now dissolved into ghostly smudges. Within moments, only a few scattered letters remained. It was as if the letter itself wished to remain a secret, as if the truth was slipping back into the shadows. Henry entered quietly, his eyes moving from Eleanor's pale face to the empty sheet. "What did it say?" he asked softly. Eleanor shook her head, despair mingling with fear. "It was about my father, and someone else. But it's gone, Henry." The ink, it vanished. He stepped closer, examining the paper. Not vanished. This was deliberate. Some inks were made to disappear when exposed to light. Whoever wrote it never intended the message to last. Her heart raced. Then someone hid it here to be found, but only for those who knew how to preserve it. She felt an ache of helplessness wash over her. Henry's expression darkened. "And perhaps someone else already knew it was here. Which means you are not the first to search these halls." A creak echoed through the corridor outside, low and unmistakable. Eleanor froze. The sound came again, measured footsteps, pausing just beyond the library door. Henry motioned for silence, his hand instinctively moving to the old cane resting by the desk, ready to use it as a weapon if needed. The door handle turned slowly. Eleanor's breath caught as the wood groaned on its hinges. The faint silhouette of a figure stretched across the floor. And then, darkness. The lamps flickered out, as though snuffed by unseen hands. The room plunged into shadow, and Eleanor felt the cold presence of someone stepping inside. The silence broke with a whisper that curled through the darkness. "You should not have found that letter." Eleanor's blood ran cold,